The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia now comes in an even more concentrated formula with 450 milligrams of cocoflavanols, 5 times more than the leading dark chocolate bar and 15 times more than the leading cocoa powder.
CocoVia has a proprietary process that preserves cocoflavanols at the highest levels, and the product undergoes rigorous testing at every stage, which allows them to guarantee the highest level of cocoflavanols per serving and to provide the purest, highest quality product possible.
People's Pharmacy listeners can now try CocoVia for 25% off by using the code Peoples25 at cocavia.com. That's COCOAVIA.com. Do you take dietary supplements? A recent meta-analysis concluded they don't protect people from cardiovascular complications. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Not everyone agrees. A new review of fish oil found it helps protect the heart. Dr. Tirone Lodog is one of the country's leading experts on the science behind herbs and supplements. She points out that people may need supplements for other reasons. Are you taking medications that could affect your nutritional status?
A month ago, a mail-order pharmacy warned about large amounts of a carcinogen in a popular heartburn medicine, ranitidine. The CEO of Valisure explains why they tested it and what they found.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, your calls and questions about the value of supplements. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist.
And I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist. Last summer, a large umbrella review of 277 clinical trials involving 24 different diets and dietary supplements concluded that, for the most part, nothing you eat or take will prevent heart disease or help you live longer. Needless to say, this conclusion was controversial. Are supplements really a waste of time?
To help us answer that question, we turn to Dr. Tirone Lodog. She's founding member of the American Board of Physician Specialties, American Board of Integrative Medicine, and the Academy of Women's Health. Her books include Women's Health in Complementary and Integrative Medicine, Life is Your Best Medicine, and Healthy at Home. Her latest book is Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More.
And we invite you to join the conversation. Do you take vitamins, minerals, or other supplements? Do you think they're helpful? The number 888-472-3366. Email us radio@peoplespharmacy.com. That number again to share your story, 888-472-3366.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Tirone Lodog.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Lodog, you have written, I think, the definitive book when it comes to vitamins and minerals and supplements in general. It's called Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More. And so you are the perfect person to react to an article that appeared fairly recently in the Annals of Internal Medicine. They looked at 277 trials of supplements for cardiovascular prevention, almost 1 million people, only randomized clinical trials, the so-called gold standard. They looked at 24 different supplements, 8 different diets, and the bottom line was nothing really worked very much, if at all. What's your thought?
Well, so I'm grateful for the contribution, of all this effort that went into creating the review. I was surprised that the headline was really about nutritional supplements don't prevent heart disease or reduce the risk of dying from heart disease, when some of this, I thought the headline would be huge study shows recommending low saturated fat diets is not supported by evidence, right? Or that the Mediterranean diet, which we all recommend, actually doesn't show that strength when it comes to heart disease. So it was an interesting reporting for me, but ultimately, I think that excluding observational trials, just focusing on randomized controlled trials and excluding observational trials, I think that was probably a misstep. I think observational research is very important because randomized controlled trials of diets are difficult because we're not in a diet naive population, right? If you give somebody a drug who's never had the drug and compare it to a placebo, great, because they've never been exposed to it. But people eat every day. And so doing randomized controlled trials can be difficult, especially long term, because it's really hard to control how people eat. Observational studies matter when it comes to nutrition, and they specifically excluded those, which I think and they admit themselves, it was a shortcoming.
Well, I think potentially it was this reliance on the randomized controlled trial, extremely rigorous methodology, et cetera, that caused them to discount the big PrediMed study because the PrediMed people had allowed some members of the family to eat some of the food they had provided for their subjects, their study subjects. And this apparently meant, well, you're not doing the study right. So they had to retract the original publication from the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013. But my understanding is they reanalyzed the data, taking this into account, and they said, it still holds up. How come it didn't hold up in this review?
I don't know. They this again, I think this was it was a monumental lift and an effort. And I think one of the things you have to remember also for me is when you look at the Mediterranean diet as just one example, when you add the multiple meta-analyses and the observational studies, the fact that we have almost 13 million people that have been followed for a very long time, we have a lot of data on the Mediterranean diet, including its beneficial effects for overall health, from inflammation to reduction of certain cancers to beneficial effects on the heart. So I think that for me, I read the study by Kahn and I look at it and I sort of sift through it. And at the end of the day, I haven't really changed my opinion on the diet, which means a diverse diet that's rich in plants, and people, if they consume meat, certainly having some lean meats in their diet, really avoiding processed foods, sugary carbs, which is where I think most of our problem is, fake food and highly processed foods. It's trying to stick to whole foods diets that may look very much like a Mediterranean diet, I still think is the answer.
Dr. Lodog, one of the questions that I have about this analysis has to do with those individual randomized control trials of vitamins and minerals. And the reason is that that's not the way we eat. And yet so many of these studies said, well, let's look at vitamin E and just do a randomized control trial with vitamin E, or just a controlled trial with folic acid, or calcium and vitamin D, or fill in the blank. It seems to me that that's a rather reductionist way to think about dietary supplements and vitamins and minerals in particular.
Well, I would agree. Many of these studies are also plagued by the fact that they don't do a base level of the nutrient, then follow it midway, and then at the end. So what was your calcium when you started? What was it mid-range, and what was it at the end? What was your vitamin D level throughout the trial, and how did it change? People who have normal levels of some of these nutrients may not achieve a lot of benefit because they're already in the normal range. Contrasting, comparing that to maybe a subgroup that was deficient, or just doing the study in people who have deficiencies, might give you a very different answer. The other thing I would say is in the study by Kahn, they did talk about calcium and vitamin D perhaps being associated with an increased risk of heart disease. Small, but they did call it out in the study. And one of the questions has been this controversy over whether calcium and it can trigger higher levels of calcium, which then triggers vascular calcification or laying down of calcium in the blood vessels. But there's also a tremendous amount of research, including that coming out of Japan, that shows that vitamin K is really important to ensure that calcium is going where it's supposed to go. So, are we giving just calcium and vitamin D? Are we giving the other nutrients that are important, magnesium for the activation of vitamin D, to its most active form? Are we giving it along with vitamin K to ensure that the calcium's going where it is? Are we monitoring the calcium levels, giving too much to people who don't need it? So for me, there's a lot of limitations with the trials, with these randomized controlled trials, and giving high levels of individual isolated vitamins as if they exist in a silo, not more as they would exist in a multivitamin or in food. I think that it often leads us to poor conclusions. And one of the reasons I also say this is that you can make a lot of errors really easy. If we did a trial, you and I decided, let's do a trial on this new thing called aspirin, and let's do it for headaches and give people 50 milligrams when they get a headache. We would find that actually it didn't relieve headache for most people because it's not dosed enough, right? So dosing has been evaluated, and we know how much to recommend for an individual experience a headache. When it comes to vitamins and minerals, nobody really checks levels. Nobody really understands the optimal amount to give. We don't know if we're giving it to a healthy population, a sick population, or a deficient population. And at the end of the day, the results are often skewed or not what people originally thought of because it's not being delivered in a way that would be naturally found in food, or you're not dosing it effectively enough for people who may be deficient to correct the deficiency. I have to just say, as somebody that works with lots of people with poor diets, that most people are not taking vitamins and minerals so they don't die of heart disease. I mean, it's just not what people are taking them for. They're taking it to fill in gaps in their diet. And let's all be really clear. Low iron plagues lots of women, making supplementation often necessary. Calcium and vitamin D and vitamin K and magnesium are all important for maintaining bone and muscle health. People take a lot of medications now, Joe, that they didn't used to, which increases the risk for nutrient deficiencies. Look at how much diabetes we have, people taking metformin. That lowers B12, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we do today, including diet. Paleo, keto, vegan, gluten-free. I mean, every day there's a new diet. And all I would say is that it makes this conversation around supplementation more important than ever because we see more and more gaps in the diet. And to be honest, I think that most people, if you ask them what are the biggest risks for heart disease, it's high blood pressure, it's diabetes, it's being overweight or obese, it's smoking cigarettes, it's not exercising, and it's eating a calorie-rich but nutrient-deficient diet. None of those will be corrected by a multivitamin or a supplement. But there's something that can be done for all of them. Managing your weight, not smoking, keeping your blood pressure under control, watching your salt intake, not smoking, getting regular exercising, and eating a whole food, diverse diet that's low in sugar and low in processed foods. And that's how you're going to keep people from having heart disease or dying from heart disease. So the study was important for some few pieces, but ultimately we know everybody knows how to reduce the risk of heart disease. And I'm surprised that there wasn't more focus in this study on some of the things that just really didn't show that it made a big difference. And I would have to say saturated fat was one of those. This is the fourth big study to fail to find a strong correlation. And yet it remains one of our strongest recommendations to the public and also for healthcare professionals to recommend to patients.
Dr. Tirone Lo-Dog, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Dr. Tirone Lo-Dog. Her latest book, Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More.
If you have a question or a comment about supplements, give us a call, 888-472-3366.
If our lines are full, email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored by Mighty Muscadine Grapeberry, king of the superfruits, 100% natural, plant-based supplements, juice, snacks, and more.
The muscadine grape is a berry providing greater health benefits than blueberries, cranberries, and the whole berry family, with oxidative damage-fighting antioxidants to support cardiovascular, immune system, and joint health.
At Mighty Muscadine, full-time chemists and food scientists check all their products for quality and purity. Find out more online, mightymuscadine.com.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. KAYA Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's KAYA Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at Verizana, Verisana.com.
And by Cocovia, maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com. That's COCOAVIA.com.
Also by Mighty Muscadine, grapeseed and skin products. Natural supplements, juice, snacks, and more containing antioxidants that research indicates may support cardiovascular, immune system, and joint health. Information online, mightymuscadine.com.
Today we're talking about vitamins, minerals, and other dietary supplements like fish oil. That's also known as omega-3 fatty acids.
And we invite you to join the conversation. Do you have a question or a story about nutrients or dietary supplements like vitamin D or turmeric or fish oil? Our lines are open, 888-472-3366. You can also send us email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
The number again, 888-472-3366. You know, Terry, there was an incredible fish oil flip-flop just recently. Dr. Joanne Manson is professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. She's chief of the Division of Preventive Medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital. She has an endowed chair, and they only do that when you are a superstar. It's the Michael and Lee Bell Professor of Women's Health. Excuse me, in January of 2019, she wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine, she and her colleagues, that omega-3 supplements did not reduce cardiovascular events more than placebo. Then, in October of 2019, she and her colleagues wrote in the Journal of the American Heart Association that, quote, omega-3 fats lower the risk for heart attacks, heart disease, and cardiovascular death.
And some of the studies that were included in those 2 analyses were the same, including Dr. Manson's Vital D study that she oversaw. So obviously, science changes.
It does. I mean, and these were, if I'm not mistaken, randomized controlled trials.
They were.
So, 1 month fish oil doesn't work for heart disease and heart attacks, and then the next month, a more comprehensive...
Not exactly
the next month, but a few months later,
yeah,
it does work. So, yeah, whiplash, right?
Potentially. It means that you need to be paying attention, but you shouldn't be hopping on every last bandwagon. Shall we go to the phones?
Let's do that.
Let's go to Tampa, Florida. Rick in Tampa. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Thank you very much for taking my call. You guys' show is great, but what I wanted to touch bases on is very important is probiotics and the health of the digestive system. If you don't have a healthy digestive system in which these important nutrients can be absorbed properly into your body, that's a very significant issue. And I know you guys have had other shows on that, but I thought it was just relevant to mention to the general overall audience about the importance of probiotics and, whether the productions of enzymes, coenzymes, bacterial things, and so forth, just the importance of that for this whole issue. So thank you very much for taking my call, and I'd be curious about you guys' thoughts on that.
Well, thank you very much for calling, Rick. And indeed, probiotics. We are just learning about probiotics. They've been popular in Europe for quite a while, but scientists are just beginning to get a handle on them. The thing about probiotics is it matters what your initial microbiota looks like to determine what probiotic might conceivably be best for you. But I was fascinated to see a really recent study in the Annals of Surgery showing that people who take probiotics or something called synbiotics, which also includes prebiotics, before elective abdominal surgery are less likely to come down with a post-surgical infection.
Oh, that is fascinating.
Absolutely fascinating.
Now, when you say microbiota, what is it you're meaning? What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the bacteria and the fungi.
Fungi? There are fungi in our digestive tracts?
There are some.
Viruses?
There are viruses. All of the
organisms.
Extremely small microorganisms that live in an ecological, hopefully, harmony in our digestive tracts.
If you'd like to join the conversation, if you've got a question about fish oil, or if you found that it's been helpful for you for example, arthritis symptoms, give us a call. The number, Terry?
The number is 888-472-3366.
And you can email us, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. Again, that number, 888-472-3366. Do you get whiplash when one day you read in the headlines, fish oil is worthless, don't take it, it doesn't do a thing, and then a couple of months later you learn that it's good for your heart after all? Now, Terry, who takes supplements and why?
Well, how about if you tell me?
Well, there's a fascinating article in Consumer Reports. It's got a cover story called Get Smart about supplements. And they actually tested a number of supplements, including turmeric, which is very popular these days, as well as echinacea. And it turns out that, well, I was surprised that millennials are taking supplements like if 2 or 3, it's like 25% are taking 2, 25% are taking 3. Of course, the silent generation, that's
the silent generation was the World War II generation.
And 26% are taking 6 or more dietary supplements. But baby boomers are taking a lot. They're taking like 21% are taking 2, 17% are taking 3 dietary supplements.
So the question really is who isn't taking supplements? And there's about 8 to 10% of the population that isn't, right?
Yeah, and guess how many supplements there are? 80,000 on the market right now, and more every day. So how do you know what's best? Well, one of the things that's sort of interesting...
It's very, very difficult to know.
Well, there are 4 organizations that actually test dietary supplements. ConsumerLab.com is one, NSF International, UL, you've heard of Underwriters Laboratories, and US Pharmacopoeia, USP. Interestingly, most of them only test about once a year, sometimes once every 2 years, so you don't always know if the supplements have been tested recently.
That's right, and but it makes much more sense to look it up and see if a supplement has been tested, because the FDA does not actually monitor
the FDA
very
doesn't
closely.
Test, doesn't monitor, pretty much doesn't do very much at all when it comes to dietary supplements.
And part of that is due to the 1994 DSHEA Act
Exactly.
of Congress. Well, Joe, Dorothy wrote to us to say fish oil works for my arthritis. Years ago, I had arthritis in my neck. Not wanting to prescribe another drug, my doctor suggested I try fish oil, told me I'd have to wait for it to kick in. Well, it did. And now, if I don't take 4,000 to 5,000, she says milligrams, and that's probably right.
It might be IUs. Sometimes
fish oil, I think it might be milligrams.
People get that confused.
A day, I ache all over within a day or two. You do have to get genuine fish oil, though, so stick with the known brands.
And we also got an email from Tim. Tim says, I started taking high-quality fish oil for my triglycerides about 3 years ago. They didn't do much for those lipids, which I brought down through diet and weight loss, but the fish oil did have a wonderful unintended side effect. It was magic for my generalized anxiety disorder. 2 days after starting 4 gel caps a day, my general anxiety disorder symptoms vanished and have not returned. However, the brand and quality matter. Nordic Naturals 1,200 milligrams fish oil gel caps gave me instant anxiety relief, but when I ran out one day and did the old stuff, I have this other brand. I'll just take these until I can get to the store routine. My anxiety symptoms roared back. I'm back on Nordic Naturals daily now, never to stray again.
Well, that's fascinating because I don't think there's a great deal of research on the psychological effects of fish oil or other supplements.
I think there's some data about depression. So that's sort of the good news. But, you know, the thing that fascinates me is a lot of people think fish oil. They think, well, that's a dietary supplement that you get in the health food store. But there are pharmaceuticals. For example, there's one that's being advertised on television called Vascepa.
Yes.
It's mostly EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid.
They call it icosapent ethyl, and it is, in fact, a purified form, as you say, of EPA. It doesn't have any DHA in it, so it's not actually fish oil, although it might be derived from fish oil. I'm not sure.
Well, it's purified for sure, and the bottom line on this is it was, in fact, approved by the Food and Drug Administration in a randomized controlled trial.
Well, Joe, we do have a question from Arlington, Texas. Mark, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hello there.
Hi.
Well, I love your show.
Thank you.
And my question is we're talking about fish oil, and I've used fish oil off and on. What quantities are we actually talking about, and what were the tested quantities?
Well, that is such a great question. As Dr. Lodog pointed out, very often there are different doses tested in these various randomized controlled trials. So there wasn't a single dose that was tested. But I think you have to get up to like 1,000 to 2,000, and I think it is milligrams, Joe.
And sometimes 3,000 to 4,000
to get some of the effects that people have determined in studies.
Now, you know what I would suggest, Mark? If you go to PubMed online, you will find the article that Dr. Joanne Manson and her colleagues wrote in the American College of Cardiology. Journal of the American Heart Association.
And you know what, Joe? I will also put a link to that after the show. I'll put a link on our show page so that you can get to it easily without searching through PubMed, which is an interesting thing to do if you have a little time.
And it may even be a free full text, and it'll tell you all about these 13 randomized controlled trials involving 127,477 participants. So in your search on PubMed, put in Manson, MANSON, and then the number 127477, and it should come right up at the top.
Great. You guys are wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Mark.
the call. We appreciate it. Bye-bye. And where to now, Terry?
Well, shall we try Ladies Island, South Carolina?
You bet.
Angel, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hey there, how are you?
We're doing well. Hope you are, Angel. What's on your mind?
Well, I have lupus, and I have to take several supplements, and 2 of them are driving me crazy. One is potassium, and for some reason, my body seems to be draining it or taking it out some way, it's always really low. And the other one is vitamin E. Because of the lupus and everything, I'm not supposed to hang out in the sunshine. And potassium, though, bothers me most. And I want to know, is it better to take the supplements twice a day, and they look like horse pills, or to have an infusion done?
Ooh, that actually is not a question we can answer, Angel, because your situation is different from most people's. The lupus, which has increased your need for potassium, means luckily it sounds like your doctor is monitoring you closely, but you should probably talk to your doctor about that. And if he or she doesn't know the answer, ask for a nutrition consultation. You may have to travel off of Ladies Island to get to such an expert, but it probably would be worth doing so that you know what is exactly the right thing to do.
You know, one of the challenges with potassium, Angel, is that it's like the Three Bears and the porridge and Goldilocks. It can't be too much. It can't be too little. It has to be just right. And that's the kind of thing that only your physician is going to be able to, A, monitor, and B, make sure you're getting enough, because there are some people who are taking medications. Let's just give an example. The ACE inhibitors, like lisinopril, if you were to take a drug like cotrimoxazole, which is an antibiotic, your potassium levels can go sky high, and that can cause an irregular heartbeat, even cardiac arrest. So potassium, too much is bad, too little is bad. It has to be just right. Thank you so much for the call. Where to next, Terry?
I think we'll talk to Tom in Marietta, Ohio. Tom, welcome to the People's Pharmacy.
Hello. Hi.
Have you got a question?
Okay. My question is, this book about the supplements that the lady you were just talking about sounds wonderful. The consumer is so confused about dosages and talk about the interaction. Okay, Dr. Linus Pauling in the 70s was promoting how wonderful vitamin C was. He spoke at Marietta College, and I had read a book by a nutritionist who had a radio show in New York City, and he said for every vitamin you have to match up the minerals and stuff. And I asked Dr. Pauling, I said, with vitamin C, he said you need magnesium especially. And he said, well, that may very well be true. We need more research. So how is the confused consumer to figure it out? That's why this book sounds wonderful, to work with that.
It is actually wonderful. So you can buy it, or you can go to your local library. They should have a copy. It's called Fortify Your Life, and the author is Dr. Tirone Low Dog.
Now, one of the things that's so interesting about Dr. Low Dog's book is she has an appendix where she discusses how medications can affect your need for vitamins and minerals. So, for example, we were just talking about potassium and how ACE inhibitors can affect potassium. Well, there are other categories of blood pressure pills called diuretics. I'm sure you've heard of hydrochlorothiazide. When people take diuretics or ACE inhibitors like lisinopril, they may deplete their body of zinc. And so you need to be – that's one of those minerals like magnesium that doesn't get very much respect. And so you may need a supplement of zinc. And in the back of her book, she'll tell you all about the most common medications that can affect minerals and vitamins. And Terry, we're going to be talking shortly with David Light about ranitidine. It's an H2 antagonist. It's a drug that's often taken for heartburn and indigestion. Well, the other class, the proton pump inhibitors, PPIs like Nexium and Prilosec and Prevacid, those drugs can deplete the body of vitamin B12. And if you're also taking metformin, which is a diabetes drug, you are potentially in trouble for lack of that crucial B vitamin.
You could indeed get low on B12. And Joe, also, magnesium is a potential problem with proton pump inhibitors.
888-472-3366 is the number to call if you'd like to join the conversation.
And coming up, as Joe mentioned, we will be talking about the heartburn medicine ranitidine, and We hope that you will find it interesting because it's kind of scary. You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
This People's Pharmacy podcast is brought to you in part by Verisana.com.
Verisana Lab offers home health tests that allow you to monitor your hormones and health conditions. You can take control of the quantitative assessment of your health and learn about male and female hormone balance, the stress hormone cortisol, leaky gut, gluten intolerance, or your gut microbiome.
Take a more active role in tracking your health and take 20% off your first order of a mail-in testing opportunity with the discount code PEOPLE. That's uppercase PEOPLE. To learn more, go to Verisana.com. That's VERISANA.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Cocovia, offering plant-based nutrients in the form of cocoflavanols for brain and heart health. Online at cocoavia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYA Biotics.com.
Also by Mighty Muscadine grape seed and skin products, natural supplements, juice, snacks, and more, containing antioxidants that research indicates may support cardiovascular, immune system, and joint health. Information online at mightymuscadine.com.
We've been talking today about supplements, but now it's time to change gears. You may have heard of the reflux medicine ranitidine, or you might know it by its brand name, Zantac. Last month, many companies pulled their ranitidine off pharmacy shelves because it was found to contain a probable carcinogen, NDMA. We're talking with the head of the pharmacy that uncovered this problem. If you have a question or a comment about Zantac or ranitidine, you can call 888-472-3366. You can also send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
David Light, a biotech entrepreneur and scientist, is the founder and CEO of ValuSure, an online pharmacy that puts medications through rigorous chemical analysis before sending them to consumers.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, David Light.
Thank you very much for having me.
David, this crazy nitrosamine contamination thing started over a year ago. It involved some blood pressure medications that were made in China and India. How did ValuSure, and please tell us what ValuSure is, get involved in testing for nitrosamine contamination?
Sure. So ValuSure is an online pharmacy that's attached to an analytical laboratory. So we're actually the first pharmacy, online or not, that is actually chemically testing what's inside medications for every single batch of every single medication that comes through our pharmacy. And so one of the obvious places for us to look for what's actually going on in those medications is the nitrosamine contaminants.
And how did that all come about?
Well, as you mentioned, about a year ago, more than a year ago, there was the first findings of these nitrosamine contaminants like NDMA, which are extremely potent carcinogens. And it seemed to have been linked to some manufacturing changes overseas in China. Now it looks like it was even broader than that. And when they switched over these solvents, kind of everything else changed in the system of manufacturing, and these contaminants were made and just weren't picked up for years. I mean, it's kind of like if you were cooking an egg in water and now all of a sudden you decide to change to cooking in oil. It's still an egg that you're making, but obviously it's going to taste quite different, and there's a lot of different chemistry that happens.
And what were the drugs involved, and how many people do you think were involved in taking them?
So originally it was found in valsartan, and then it continued to expand into losartan and irbesartan. Millions of Americans take these drugs.
Now, very interestingly, your company announced that it had found one of these nitrosamine contaminants at high levels in a drug that is not one of these sartan blood pressure medicines. The drug is ranitidine. We know it by its brand name as Zantac. It's a drug that's often prescribed for heartburn. What prompted you to test ranitidine?
So as part of Valisher's Pharmacy, we test samples from every single batch of all medications that come through, and we added this carcinogen analysis technology earlier this year. And actually, one of our co-founders, Adam, his infant daughter was prescribed ranitidine. So a lot of people know it as Zantac from over-the-counter, but it's also one of the top 50 most prescribed medications in the United States. It used to be one of the number one prescriptions in the world a number of decades ago. And currently, it's also been prescribed to infants and pregnant mothers. And so when we added this carcinogen analysis to our standard workflow earlier this year, we actually were testing ranitidine as one of the first drugs because of Adam's infant daughter.
He must have been shocked.
Yeah, we were all quite shocked to see the initial data. I mean, we were running the standard FDA protocol at the time for the analysis of NDMA. We're also an ISO-accredited laboratory. That's accreditation from the International Organization for Standardization, specifically for the analysis of NDMA. So using this FDA standard protocol, we were detecting millions of nanograms of NDMA when the FDA maximum permissible exposure was 96. So literally tens of thousands of times higher detection of this NDMA than what was permissible, which was extremely shocking. And we obviously repeated the analysis many times and even asked an external laboratory to confirm. And it was quite clear that this was the correct results.
Well, that is so confusing because the FDA has not agreed with you. Well, why not?
Well, so it turns out there's really two fundamental problems going on. However, one root cause. And one of these problems is much worse than the other. So the problem that the FDA has been talking a lot about is a contamination. And honestly, we didn't even see this as a contamination originally. We weren't even looking for contamination. The much worse problem than a contamination, which really was the issue that we just talked about with valsartan and losartan. This was bad manufacturing practices in plants in China and overseas. And you had this additional contaminant from the process that stuck around in the pills. And obviously you don't want that. But that is dependent on how it was manufactured, who made it, which lots, which pills. However, in the case of ranitidine, this contaminant seems to be just a byproduct of the root problem, the root cause, which is that the drug itself is extremely unstable. The molecule of ranitidine has both the N and the DMA of NDMA, the carcinogen. And so really by using the FDA standard protocol at the time, what we discovered is that the drug can actually react with itself. Not just with components that might be in your stomach or enzymes in your body, but even reacting with itself in an incredibly efficient reaction with a very short exposure to heat, kind of the standard heat they use in these analytical conditions that were part of the FDA standard, was forming these millions of nanograms of NDMA. But that's a very important point because it really underscores that the molecule is so unstable it can actually react with itself. We tested not only tablets, but also pure reference standard. So there's nothing else in that test other than just the molecule. There's no fillers, no excipients or other ingredients in there. Just the stable solvent and the drug, which is reacting with itself. But now the second problem, which we at Valisher certainly think is much, much worse than a contamination, is the fact that this instability happens not just in this kind of high heat condition of a standard lab analysis, but also in the human body. And in this case of concern over ranitidine's instability in the human body, there's actually 37 years of scientific research concerned about this. So it's not just that Valisher is raising the alarm on a completely new finding that is absolutely shocking. It is a shocking finding, but it's been researched by laboratories all over the world in a variety of different conditions in animals, in conditions mimicking the human stomach, which we also did and found hundreds of thousands of nanograms of NDMA. But most recently, in 2016, there was actually a clinical study done in humans. So it's very hard to reproduce laboratory conditions of something to mimic the human body. It's practically impossible. You can take as many best guesses as you can, which obviously we did also on the stomach conditions. But the ultimate test is obviously the entire human body in a clinical study approved by an internal review board, which was done at Stanford University. And what this study showed was that when you take a single pill of Zantac, 150 milligram Zantac, and then measure your urine, so they looked at 10 healthy individuals, 5 men, 5 women, and measured the urine content of NDMA, the carcinogen. And it had increased from baseline levels of around 100 nanograms, the FDA acceptable limit, to over 40,000 nanograms by taking a single pill. And this is extremely alarming. Not only is 40,000 nanograms in your urine extremely alarming, but only about 1% or less of NDMA that's exposed in a body actually makes it to urine. What NDMA does is it sticks to DNA and mutates it, which is what makes it such a potent carcinogen. So it's sticking to DNA throughout your body, and only 1% of it is making it into urine, which suggests quite strongly that there's actually millions of nanograms of NDMA being formed in your body, which from our chemical laboratory tests showed that the drug is definitely capable of forming these millions of nanograms.
David Light, the Food and Drug Administration says, don't worry, be happy. Such low levels, you don't have to worry. And people have been exposed to this drug now for decades, millions of people. How do you respond to the FDA's don't worry message?
So I think it's definitely concerning. I think tens of governments all over the world have done recalls. A lot of major companies in the United States have done recalls. The fact that this drug is given to infants and pregnant mothers, I think it's definitely concerning. And patients should, if they're concerned, talk to their doctors about alternatives. And there are many alternatives out there for the conditions that Zantac and ranitidine are meant for.
You've submitted to the Food and Drug Administration a citizen's petition calling for the removal of all ranitidine products and Zantac, the brand name, and you've called for very careful disposal of those products because of the carcinogen content. How has the FDA responded to your petition?
So it seems that so far the FDA has at least made some announcements about there being NDMA in ranitidine products. They've recently updated their announcement to say that there are unacceptable levels of NDMA, whereas they first said that they were low. Now they're saying they're unacceptable. However, there has not been a call from the FDA on recalls. You did have only a few days later after the FDA's announcement, September 13th, you had Health Canada that came out September 17th and issued a complete ban on all distribution of ranitidine throughout Canada. They even said in the second line of their statement, current evidence suggests that NDMA may be present in ranitidine regardless of the manufacturer, which I think really underscores the root cause of the problem, which is that all products that contain ranitidine, whether it's Zantac or the generics, are fundamentally unstable, and not just unstable, but directly form the known carcinogen NDMA.
What are the best alternatives, and are there any other drugs that people should be avoiding?
So actually, Valisher did test the other H2 blockers in the same class as ranitidine, and PPIs, proton pump inhibitors, which are of a similar class for acid reflux. And we did find some NDMA formation issues with nizatidine, which is in a similar class and has both the N and the DMA in the molecule. But famotidine and cimetidine seem to be fine. All the PPIs all did not seem to have this issue of forming NDMA, and we strongly suggest talking to your doctor about these as alternatives.
David Light, you have upset the FDA's apple cart in a sense that you discovered a problem that the Food and Drug Administration pretty much has ignored for years, if not for decades. They're not too happy with you, are they?
I would hope that we'd all come around to the concept that we're on the same side. ValueSure's primary concern is with the consistency and safety and quality of medications, and I would hope that it's obviously the mission of the FDA.
And I guess a lot of our listeners are concerned about generic drugs in general, and now perhaps even some brand name drugs for that matter. What should they be doing when it comes to verifying that their medications are, what they say they are, that there aren't contaminants or that they have what they're supposed to have?
It's very hard to know or to control as an individual what's going on in your medications, especially most pharmacies change around manufacturers regularly, especially if you're taking a generic. It can be made by many different places around the world. Certainly at ValueSure, what we feel is that we should be testing every single one of these batches. We're licensed in 38 states. Obviously, I highly recommend folks to check us out in what we do. We also have a service now where we can actually analyze samples of people's individual medications, provided that they're not controlled substances. So definitely encourage people to be vigilant on their medications. As much as you can, try and keep things as consistent as possible, and definitely check out ValueSure and what we do.
I think a lot of our listeners would like to know how they could send in their pills to be tested. What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, if you go to valusure.com, VALISURE.com, right at the top of the page, we have obviously options for getting into our pharmacy or analyzing a medication. So there's a process that you go through. We send you a kit, and you can send samples of a medication depending on what kind of testing you'd like to get done. Obviously things like carcinogen analysis, but we also look at dosage or dissolution, how pills actually dissolve. And we have this available in 48 states. There's some specific state laws in Massachusetts and Virginia that prevent us from being able to do it there at the time. But everywhere else, we're happy to make this service available to the general public.
A lot of people think the Food and Drug Administration tests all of the drugs that are imported from abroad. Is that a mistake?
It's largely not true. So the FDA does very few actual chemical tests. What the FDA primarily does is do inspections every few years, where the actual chemical testing is done by the manufacturer that self-reports that information to the FDA. But obviously, especially overseas, and if you've read Catherine Eben's book, Bottle of Lies, there's unfortunately a tremendous number of instances of fraud. Companies like Ranbaxy, almost all of their drugs were entirely fraudulently, like their tests were made up. There's recent evidence that there's roughly an 80% fraud rate in China. So certainly the feeling of ValueSure is that we absolutely do need to do independent testing, not just by the manufacturers, and that's what we do at ValueSure, but FDA does very little testing on products.
David Light, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've been listening to David Light, biotech entrepreneur and scientist. He's the founder and CEO of ValueSure, an online pharmacy that puts medications through rigorous chemical analysis before sending them to consumers.
Our full interview with David Light was too long for this broadcast, but we are going to include it in the podcast of the show. Find out how consumers can verify that their drugs are good quality. How well does the FDA test imported medications? If you want to send your pills in for testing, how do you get them to ValiSure? Have you taken Zantac or ranitidine? Are you concerned about these reports? Our lines are open for one more minute, I think, Joe. 888-472-3366 or send us an email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com. And we do have an email, Joe.
And who's the email from?
The email is from Joe, who says, I am 67 years old male. After many years of daily PPIs, I've been diagnosed with osteopenia. I get calcium in my diet and spend time in the sun. I don't want to take prescription drugs that rebuild bone. It was suggested I take calcium and vitamin D, but my wife's doctor said calcium can contribute to heart and artery issues. I've reduced the PPI to 20 milligrams of pantoprazole every other day. I take Pepcid AC on the off days. Your thoughts? Do you have thoughts for Joe?
I agree with Joe's doctor or his
wife's doctor
that calcium in high doses could be a problem for cardiovascular complications. So I don't.
And it is actually not so unusual that somebody might have, as a side effect of long-term use of a PPI, osteopenia, which means weakened bones.
Right, because it does deplete the body of magnesium. Here's an email from Judy. Judy says, I have taken Zantac for more than 30 years. I also take Prevacid daily. Whew, that's bad heartburn. I'm continuing my medicine unless my doctor says to stop. Next thing, we'll hear that it's okay.
That I don't think we're going to, but it sounds like an optimistic approach.
Well, it's optimistic, but I think it
doesn't sound
this
smart.
Point, if we were to believe David Light's data,
which I think we should,
ranitidine may pose a problem because of the nature of the compound itself, that it's just too unstable.
Now, the PPIs do not have that particular problem.
No.
And there are at least two other H2 blockers, which is the class ranitidine is in, that don't have the problem. Which ones are they?
Famotidine, which people may recognize under the brand name Pepcid, and cimetidine, which they may recognize as Tagamet. They've been around a very long time, and they appear to be quite stable. What concerns me is that tens of millions of people over the course of the last couple of decades have probably been taking ranitidine, some on a daily basis for years, if not for decades.
Exactly, and we don't know the consequences of that.
Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for listening and for calling in your stories and your questions. We want to thank our guests as well, Dr. Tyrone Lodog and David Light.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Pamela Alberta provided technical assistance. Jenny Lawson engineered.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
If you would like to order today's show, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1187. That number again, 800-732-2334, or you can find it on the website, peoplespharmacy.com.
And when you go to peoplespharmacy.com, you can tell us what you think about the show. You can give us your comment or your question about supplements.
And tell people a little bit about the podcast, because in the podcast we have an extended interview with David Light.
Well, we do, and it offers the opportunity for people to find out how you can get your drugs tested to find out if they are really what they say they are and nothing else.
You can also sign up for our free online newsletter. If you want to learn about drug alerts, this is an easy way to stay on top of the breaking health news. You will also, as we said, find our podcast, and we'd be grateful for a review if you go there. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you so much for listening. Please join us again next week.